Greetings, fellow scribes! Welcome back to the archive. This week, I continue my series on the history of BattleTech by talking about the culmination of the war against the Word of Blake. The final liberation of Terra. Now, you have to understand, at this point, the Word of Blake war has been going on between overtly and covertly for about 10 years. During this time, technology that was thought obsolete has been dusted off just because this is a war that is so intense. Any combat vehicle, any battle mech is better than nothing. Mechs from the dawn of the battle mech are seeing resurgence. For example, gladiators, the first Karita battle mech, are showing up on battlefields. One World used primitive battle mech technologies to mass produce a garrison mech called the Rook. Totally new design, but with ancient Myanmar gyro engine tech, just because it was cheaper and easier to make, easier to mass produce. So, at this point, you're having mechs almost 600 years old in their design on the battlefields. You're having the latest clan tech mechs fighting alongside them, and everything in between. And then you've had the discovery of data cores with the Royal mechs. The mechs that the Star League issued to their Royal Battle Mech regiments. Mechs like the Heliopolis, a walking artillery mech. And not Arrow 4 artillery, which can be shot down. No. A walking sniper artillery piece. Full-sized. You find the Royal Lambs, though those didn't get out into the field, including the Wasp Lamb, which could carry a nuke. And then you see mechs of familiar archetypes, familiar designs, that the technological combinations of them are the most efficient, most practical, and actually fully work. The most optimized mechs you could imagine. Comstar was releasing these, the Word of Blake was fielding them, a handful of factories started making them. So you had these added into the mix. And it is with these forces that Stone and his allies fought their way through the Word of Blake Protectorate. Through worlds that the Word of Blake decided it was better to leave them dead in the fires of nuclear annihilation, rather than let the rest of the Innosphere have them. And this fighting culminates on Terra herself, the heart of humanity. A world that, even though clans were helping, the clans themselves were not allowed to land on, due to various political reasons. So sit back, relax, and enjoy as we talk about the drive and conquest of Terra. In the BattleTech universe, ultimately, all planetary invasions begin in space. Normally, it works like this. Jump ships jump into the system, launch dropships. The dropships begin a burn towards the planet. That usually takes about 7 days in most cases. And then planetary defenders begin mobilizing at a point where the fighters have a chance to be able to engage and then come back. They launch fighters to engage dropships. Usually a couple dropships are destroyed during this point, and the fighters burn back to rearm, reload, to engage the dropships when they're burning into the atmosphere. Because that's usually a vulnerable time because of how the dropships have to enter. They're kind of sitting ducks. Especially the spheroid dropships, which carry the larger units. Well, that's how it normally works. Then you enter some worlds that are entrenched. They have fighter bases out from their main location, so that during the entire approach, your dropships are getting hit by fighters, damaged, blown up, having to bring an escort of other fighters with them to screen them. Then you have important worlds. Worlds like Tharkad, New Avalon, Luthien, Hesperus. These are worlds that are so important. There's going to be a warship or two just perpetually in system as a sort of defense. And those warships, they're going to do things like, they're going to go after your fighters, maybe. Maybe they'll go after your dropships. But they know where the pirate points in that system are. They might make a close-in, high-risk jump to where your jump ships have deployed and take them out, and then go deal with everything else. Or maybe they'll just hang over the planet in a location where they can just blast anything coming in, and depending on what the individual forces' doctrines are, and depending on how open the world is, they might be in positions where they can lay pinpoint orbital bombardment. But that's usually frowned upon. There's a lot of heavy restrictions on when you can use that. But Terra is something more. Around Terra is the remains of the Word of Blake fleet. Everything that fled during the onslaught of Stone's coalition coming in fled to Terra. So it's heavily reinforced, navally speaking. On top of that, it has a still functioning Reagan SDS system defense system. This is a anti-capital ship automated defense system. And it was built around things like Caspar drones, which are drone warships, and a number of other drone dropships that were designed to do one thing: ram another warship. But you also have the fact that Comstar and the Word of Blake have continuously been improving things for centuries. And this yields all sorts of horrific things. Drone fighters. Drone dropships that have capital scale weapons on them, and so are capable of damaging an actual capital scale warship. Some of them even have nuclear warheads. And then you have the absolute terror. You have the Megiddo defense stations. These are converted ore haulers, and they fire a ripple wave of capital scale missiles. Nuclear tipped capital scale missiles, in fact. And these things, there were only a couple of them. During the battle in space over Titan, one of these laid waste to the flagship of the Draconis Combine, the Lair of Mighty Worms. One of these crippled one of the eldest of the Leviathan 2s, the Leviathan itself. This fighting was vicious. And ultimately, Mars was viewed as less important. The clan fleets were diverted to Titan, where the command and control for these systems was. It was a vicious and brutal battle. Many of the forces involved did not make it back. But it cleared the way for the space battle above Terra. The space battle above Terra was, again, brutal. This was the last of the Comstar fleet against the Word of Blake fleet. Ultimately, the greatest naval mind in the Inner Sphere, Elaine Barisic, the presenter naval of Comstar, died in the battle. Now note, this is a man who developed the modern naval tactics used by the Inner Sphere, who was the fleet commander for Task Force Serpent, and everything that entailed. And he died. His ship destroyed in space. But ultimately, the forces of stone were able to crack the nut that was Terra's space defenses. And with that, they were able to make their landings upon Terra. Stone himself would lead the most important battle. The landing at Hilton Head, the seat of the Primus, the seat of the head of the Word of Blake, on the principle of cut off the head and the snake will die. But not everything goes as planned. Stone's forces landed at Hilton Head, while other forces under his coalition were hitting various other places: Cairo, Sydney, Rio, Singapore, Dallas, all of those. Stone personally led the assault on Hilton Head, and he was met with a vicious and determined counterattack. Ultimately, Stone had to make the choice to retreat from that initial engagement, execute a tactical withdrawal. And from this point, Stone began fighting across North America, engaging in places, but having to move, because the Word of Blake would, whenever they got pinned down or figured out where Stone's forces were, would send in a massed counterattack. And these individual fights were always brutal. Stone would withdraw, but what would end up happening is he'd still lose troops. So who was whittling him down? Eventually, Rio was captured, and Dallas, well, the Word of Blake know how to demoralize someone. And the Word of Blake nuked Dallas. Forces from Dallas would link up with Stone. Survivors from Dallas would link up with Stone. But September 7th of 3078, Center Marshal St. James of the Word of Blake ordered a massive counterattack. And then he used that counterattack for one purpose: to hide where he went. St. James went to the last functional Castle Bryan in North America, Devil's Tower. Yes, if you have ever seen Close Encounter of the Third Kind, that location is where the Word of Blake would ultimately make its stand. Their fight was extremely dirty. As forces began to coalesce there, as locations fell and more forces were able to be diverted to reinforce Stone, as more forces were freed up from fighting on Luna and Titan and were able to be sent to reinforce Stone, the battle intensified and Stone closed in on Devil's Tower. And then is when things got interesting. First, While this is going on, the Word of Blake does something. It's never exactly said what, but it essentially is they launched SDS dropships from Hilton Head and then blew it up. Like, majorly blew it up. This, of course, kept any data that was in Hilton Head from being accessible and, well, available for salvage operations to Stone's people. And then the Battle of Devil's Tower comes. Around Devil's Tower are several mobile structures called rattlers. These are things able to shoot warships from orbit. And they also have weapons that they can use, capital grade weapons that they can use with some planning onto the battlefield. They had to be taken down. They were defended by drone battle mechs called Revenants and various other drone combat vehicles. The purpose of that was to slow and cause attrition among the forces that were arrayed against the Word of Blake. And they did. And then came the hell. Mechs not seen since the first liberation of Terra under Kerensky. The actual behemoths used by, well, in prototype form, by Stefan Amaris. But these Omegas fixed a lot of the problems. These were bipedal mechs massing more than 100 tons. They had massive, thick plates of armor, heavy artillery pieces in the forms of multiple Gauss rifles. They fought, and they didn't turn the tide. But where they showed up, they laid devastation. They took concentrated fire from sections of Stone's forces. But eventually, Stone's forces breached Devil's Tower. And once they got in, it became the tight, close quarters fighting you would expect inside a massive military base built into effectively a mountain. Powered armor troops fighting their way in, killing anything they could get. Dealing with the powered armor troops that were inside defending it, including various Mene Domine as well as purifiers. Purifier suits have a mimetic armor. What that means is they blend into their surroundings. They're stealth suits. Many of them had weapons like flamers on them, which are perfect for dealing with any conventional infantry that have gone in. Heck, in some cases, they're great for dealing with even battle armor infantry. And this fighting eventually led to the capture of St. James. He had to be captured. If he was killed, they couldn't have convinced Word of Lake forces to surrender. So St. James was defeated, and from there, there was mop-up operations on Terra. There will always be mop-up operations after such a large battle. But, for the most part, the hostilities ceased. Terra had fallen. Stone's forces were triumphant. And next week, we will talk about the aftermath and the rise of the Republic. Until then, I'd like you all to remember to have fun and keep gaming.